Hey guys, Jeremiah here trapping today, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about my new book, Walter Arnold, Maine Trapper, Stories from One of the Last Mountain Men. And this is really exciting for me. This book I've been working on for about 2 years now, and just finally published it just a few days ago. If you are a listener of the Trapping Today podcast, then you've already heard about this. A lot of people have ordered it, really excited to share it with folks. But I know a lot of you guys are just on YouTube and maybe you haven't seen my other stuff before. So I wanted to make sure other people knew about this. So this is a book about a legendary Maine trapper. Basically what the book is, it's over 300 and some odd pages. And it's all kinds of different stories from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s from this guy Walter Arnold. Now Arnold was one of those old-timer mountain men guys that we all kind of dream of being when we're started out trapping and get out in the woods, and type of person that we idolize in a lot of cases. He basically, for a long time, he trapped for a good part of his living. Back when fur prices were good, he'd go out in the woods. He was born in 1894 in the woods, basically a little small town on the edge of the Maine woods. And he would go from the time he was just a kid. You know, his dad was a lumberjack, a market hunter, and a trapper. And so Walter learned how to trap from his old man, and they'd go out in the woods when he was a kid, and he was hooked on it. So he started out as a young guy, and he was a guide. He guided fishermen and hunters, and he got into trapping as part of earning his living. He did all kinds of different things. But basically, when he really caught his stride, Arnold was spending a good part of the winters out in the woods trapping. What he would do is he'd go out into an area where he had it was kind of his territory. Some years he'd have a partner, some years he wouldn't. Most of the time he would have a partner. And they'd build a main cabin, and then they'd have several line cabins strung out in the woods. And this was all done on foot. And these guys are in the rugged mountains of western Maine, northwestern Maine. So they were basically walking all through their trap lines, and it would be days and days. So they'd have a home trap line. They'd have to pack and carry all of their food in, everything, and then they'd go out and run their lines. They'd have their traps stashed out in the woods, and they'd run their lines out in different areas, and they'd have different cabins they'd stay at and do a circuit for a few days, and then come back to their main cabin, skin their fur, and do all of that. So that was a big part of what Arnold did. He was a real intuitive trapper. He was a pretty smart guy, and he was very observant. And one of the things that's unique about Arnold, he wasn't, he's become a legend now. He was one of the founders of the Maine Trappers Association. He had a very popular lure making business, Arnold's Professional Animal Lures. He was basically in the Fur Fishing Game magazine for decades. He sold tons of lures to people all over the United States and Canada. He was a really well-known guy. Later on in life, he left and went to live in the woods by himself, left the family and everything, and he lived out his last couple decades of life, just all alone in the middle of nowhere. He was kind of made famous as being kind of one of the last woods hermits, a guy that lived out on his own in a cabin that was only accessible by plane. So he was an interesting character, but he wasn't necessarily the best trapper in the world. It's easy for us to make legends out of these guys, right? The point wasn't that, this guy was a better trapper than so-and-so and that guy and that guy. No, the point was that Walter Arnold shared stuff with us, with other trappers. He basically, everything that he learned about trapping, he shared in the pages of magazines that were read nationwide. Most notably, Arnold wrote a regular column in Fur Fishing Game magazine. And over the years, he didn't do it every month, but over the years he had dozens and dozens of articles that were printed in Fur Fishing Game. So people from all over the country would read his stuff. And Arnold, the fact that Arnold shared that stuff is kind of what made him a legend. People read about him and read all the stories and his experiences, and he became pretty famous. And he sold a lot of lure as well as a result. But I'm not saying the guy's the best trapper in the world. What I'm saying is he was a rugged dude. He was really smart. He was really hardworking. He was a good trapper. he was an outdoorsman through and through, and he wrote and shared his experiences with us. So for a long time, Arnold donated all this information, all of his papers to a library, to the University of Maine Library. And he died, it would have been 40 years ago now, and that collection's been in that library for about 50 years. And no one's ever done anything with it. So I kind of felt the need to put together a bunch of these old stories, and so that's what I did. After going through and getting the copyright stuff all figured out, and going and organizing things and finding all of the old stories, editing them, going through selecting which ones to print, I came up with this book. And I split this up, and there's essentially 3 different books here. It's like, it's 300 some pages. There's a lot there, but there's 3 different books. What I did was I separated out the 3 different types of stories that are included in here. The first is Trapping Adventures, and this is basically the outdoors wilderness trapping experiences that Walter Arnold had throughout his career. And so Trapping Adventures talks about different, the first chapter, for instance, is kind of an overview of an entire season that he and his partner Bill Gurley went through, went in the woods and built these cabins ahead of time, brought all their supplies in, and Walt and Bill ran separate trap lines out of this camp and a few different line cabins throughout the winter. And it talks about all their experiences throughout the course of that season. Under ice beaver trapping, backwoods trap line, there's just a bunch of different chapters which are different articles or collections of articles from those experiences. Book 2 is called The Fur Bearers, and this is Arnold's observations and experiences with fur bearers in Maine from his experiences as a trapper and a woodsman. So he writes a lot about otter, bobcat, fisher, mink, and fox, and this kind of collects all of his writings on those different species together in that section of the book. And then finally, book 3 or part 3 is Trapping Methods, and this is where Arnold shares with other trappers, different types of sets to make, hints, tips, and tricks on trapping, things to do, things not to do. These are old, outdated methods in a lot of cases, but they're still really interesting to read, and you can still pick up a lot of information from them. For instance, he talks about water trapping the fox. The water set was a very old school traditional set that most people don't practice anymore. But believe it or not, back in those days, more people used the water set than used the dirt hole set, at least in the East. And so that's really interesting writing there to look into. He talks about preparedness, talks about making dirt sets for fox, how to get trapping gear together, scent control on the trap line. That was a big thing back then. He has 2 different chapters on lure making, the how and why of lures and scent making ingredients. And he actually offers some nice lure formulas here if you want to try out making your own lures, and a variety of other topics. So basically, there it is in a nutshell, Walter Arnold, Maine Trapper. I'll provide a link in the description of this video. You can find it on Amazon. That's basically where you're going to get this book, is on Amazon. You can also mail me a check. You can try my email address. That's jrodwood@gmail.com, jrodwood@gmail.com. And I'll give you an address to send a check to if you want to do that. But otherwise, search Walter Arnold Trapper on Amazon, and you will find this book. It'll show up. It's actually getting quite popular. I've sold a lot of copies on Amazon so far, so great to know, great to see that, and the most exciting thing is being able to share all of these old trapping stories with people. So if you're interested, I really appreciate you picking up a copy. Walter Arnold, Maine Trapper, Stories from One of the Last Mountain Men. All right, thanks guys, take care.